Thank you, Vlad. My name is Dr. Sam Dubé, Canadian non-clinical academic physician. And our special guest today is Sasha Latypova. Sasha is the former owner and executive of multiple contract research organizations. She is a former pharmaceutical executive, currently living in the United States, actually for a couple of decades now in the United States at least. And she is going to present to us something very important and urgent today, that being the evidence of the Department of Defense involvement with COVID countermeasures worldwide. Sasha, thank you so much for joining us today. I leave it to you.
Hi, thank you, Sam. Hello, everyone. I'm going to do some presentation, sharing some slides, and then we can do a questions answer after that. But what I wanted to share today with you, let me share my screen. Okay, yeah. So today I wanted to talk about this topic, intent to harm, and it covers various aspects of what has been going on for the past, 2.5 years visibly, but there's been a lot of preparation and planning for this to happen, and how we can think about this criminal cartel, or we should call it enterprise, because actually it is officially a U.S. government enterprise. It's called COVID Enterprise, or PEMC, and we will talk about it some more. Let's discuss a summary. In the summary slide, I want to say what exists today as a summary of all evidence, and that we have been able to gather. And all of this evidence points to intent to harm. I'm not going to have enough time to discuss, toxicity, safety, efficacy. That's been covered very extensively by many researchers. But we know today that these shots, so-called vaccines, have been designed to be toxic. The mechanisms are extensively documented and demonstrated, and in lay terms, they basically instruct the cells of your body to attack themselves and destroy themselves. There is absolutely no safety. In fact, we see horrific deaths and injury toll in all databases that exist, such as VAERS, VSafe, Hydrovigilance, Yellow Card, many other databases for pharmacovigilance are pointing to the same thing. We have millions of reports in the U.S. Approximately over 1 million extra deaths have happened in the last 2 years, about 600,000 a year of extra deaths, and unfortunately in the younger people and in children too. There is no efficacy. We have numerous reports, and now most recently Cleveland Clinic published a report showing that the more injections you have, the more likely you are going to have COVID, and this is in the young and otherwise healthy population of their employees. There's absolutely horrific manufacturing. I've covered this extensively. I call it very bad manufacturing practices as opposed to current good manufacturing practices, which is the law in the United States, and there are similar laws all over the world. These products are being produced completely non-compliant to these sets of laws, and so there is absolutely no assurance what goes into those shots, and absolutely anything can be found there. All of this is supported by malignant policy worldwide. Governments are lying, covering up, gaslighting. They're actually all acting from the same script, it seems like. They're gaslighting the injured, they're prosecuting any dissent from the medical community, any whistleblowers, and of course they're colluding with the mass media, and there is a substantial and very perverse funding of all of the above. And in about a day, our Congress is going to approve yet another couple of trillion of spending to maintain this criminal cartel.
Right, the omnibus bill.
Yes. So at this point, if you see all of that, or if you don't see it, I feel really sorry for you. If you do see it, you're probably screaming and you're saying, why there's no action? And obviously all of this is wrong, and why no action by the regulators or by the courts? And here's the explanation why. So I'm borrowing a lot of very deep legal research by Catherine Watt, who writes very important Substack. It's called Bailiwick News. I suggest everyone subscribe to her. She has an encyclopedia of law traced back to early 1900s on this matter. But I'm going to cover just very key pieces of it and more recent ones. So the first piece of pseudo-law that we have to consider is emergency use authorization in the United States. It was put in place in 1997 under Clinton, and it gets rid of FDA safety and efficacy regulations under this framework. Now, originally, as all these things go, it was very limited to certain situations, and there are at least some criteria that apply to this. Most important one being that there are no existing treatments for this condition. And that explains why there was such a perverse and massive campaign to suppress early treatments for COVID, because they needed to satisfy this criteria. They needed to pretend like there were no treatments for COVID, and that's why they massively suppressed hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin and other treatments and other treatment protocols, and prosecuted every doctor who tried to treat their patients. So that's one piece of legislation that's important here. The second one is not many people know about it, but you should read up on it, and this is really critical for how all of this crime can be committed. It's called Other Transaction Authority. It was put in place a long time ago, amended most recently under Obama in 2015. And this particular way of contracting, I'll discuss it in more detail, but it enables Department of Defense, among other government agencies, to order undisclosed military prototypes from private manufacturers, such as pharmaceutical companies. And finally, what clicks this whole structure into place is PrEP Act and Public Health Emergency Declaration. PrEP Act was also put in place before 2020. It was particularly bulletproof and updated, amended with deep participation from Robert Kudlick, who was Assistant Secretary of Pandemic Preparedness and Response under Trump. And then during early 2020, Trump announced public health emergency under Stafford Act, which also has never been used before in the United States. And when this happens, when we have a public health emergency, all of this thing, this cage clicks into place and covers everyone. So let's look at Other Transaction Authority. So Other Transaction Authority, as I said, this is a way for Department of Defense to order military prototypes and bypass any regulation that applies to regulated companies, such as pharmaceutical companies. So this is very, very important to understand. This particular way of contracting originally was put in place in the US in the 60s. Now it expanded to 11 government agencies, and the Department of Defense is particularly fond of these things because it allows them to, as I said, bypass any regulations that apply to otherwise regulated products, such as pharmaceutical or biotech or devices or pretty much anything, and just call it prototype and a demonstration. And another very critical piece of law, and that's why I'm just quoting it here. So once the public health emergency is announced, then this comes into play. According to this law in the US, use of emergency use covered medical countermeasures, once they're designated as such by the Secretary of Health and Human Services, which happened on March 10th, 2020, shall not be considered to constitute a clinical investigation. So, during public health emergency, when medical countermeasures ordered by DoD under OTA are used in the emergency use authorized manner, they are not pharmaceuticals. So, the biggest lie perpetrated on American citizens and people worldwide was by our regulatory authorities worldwide, who were pretending to regulate these products. They have no authority to regulate these products because they cannot be clinical investigational products. So the clinical trials, so-called clinical trials, and research and development, so-called research and development, those are performance art. They're fake. They don't exist. For these things, which are not pharmaceutical products, those exercises, such as clinical trials and research and development activities, do not apply. Now, what does apply? How do they get deployed, these products? Well, turns out there isn't really any criteria for how they get deployed. It's basically, again, based on the same piece of law from the US. This is entirely to the discretion of the HHS secretary, Health and Human Service secretary, during HHS declared public health emergency. So there's no criteria to declare public health emergency. As you remember, WHO, unelected, unaccountable, private organization, pronounced somewhere that we have novel coronavirus pandemic based on 40 cases out of 8 billion people in the world. So they decided it's a pandemic. And then all of them, the house of cards everywhere, all the health agencies fell for this and started announcing their, public health emergencies in their respective countries, and that happened in the US too. So once they do it based on no criteria, based on when they feel like it, then the deployment of these countermeasures is entirely at the discretion of the Health and Human Services Secretary, who was at the time Alex Azar under Trump, and now it's Javier Becerra. So this piece of law says that the HHS Secretary may issue authorizations if he or she, in their sole capacity, concludes that based on the totality of scientific evidence available, if available, it doesn't have to be available, these products may be effective. That's the only criteria that applies. May be effective because Alex Azar thinks so, or Javier Becerra thinks so, or whoever succeeds them thinks so. And by the way, there's no criteria for stopping. They can continue thinking that they may be effective and therefore deploying them on every man, woman, child in the United States because they think that their potential or known potential benefits overweigh their known and potential risks. So that's it. That's how this continues under public health emergency. So that explains why the public health emergency has been extended 12 or 13 times and will continue being extended because this is what's needed for the HHS secretary to act like a dictator and to push all these untested, very dangerous countermeasures on every man, woman, and child in the United States. And then the same thing exists outside of the United States, of course.
So, Sasha, essentially, it boils down to being the opinions of unelected, unaccountable, and in many cases, international organizations just saying what they want to say about these injections.
Absolutely. That's how it works. And also, as you can see, there are no criteria for changing the opinion of those unelected bureaucrats. They can continue pretending that the data doesn't exist because, well, it says right here, it doesn't have to be available. So they can go on continuing pretending that the data doesn't exist and give us these, answers like, oh, we've looked at it and it's safe and effective, and that's it. The safe and effective here doesn't have any legal criteria, unlike for real pharmaceutical products. Then you have to actually prove it. Here you don't. And
so they've banished the requirement for safety and efficacy, essentially.
Yes, and then they lied to the public that these products are regulated by FDA in the US or regulated by Health Canada in Canada or regulated by European medicines agencies. Those groups have no impact on these products and have no regulatory authority over these products. That's what everyone has to realize. That's the biggest lie. And so
politicians and media were touting the injections to be, the countermeasures to be safe and effective. This was just what they were being told.
Yes, and that was part of the performance art to convince the public. So the regulatory agencies impersonated regulators in this case, and then the media supported that impersonation and propagated that message. So they broadcast this performance art and play, which was called vaccine development and approval, but in reality, no real regulated vaccine development and approval ever happened for these things.
Sasha, it's incredible how apt your description, performance art, is so apt here.
Absolutely. So this also, by the way, explains the very curious use of the word demonstration in DoD contracts for vaccines, because that's exactly what demonstration is. Demonstration is fake. Demonstration is art. It's not the real deal. And they exactly ordered them, and I'll discuss that also. The DoD in the US ordered all of these things as demonstrations. The clinical trials were not ordered by the Department of Defense or HHS because these are not possible for this type of material, the countermeasures. It's not possible to do clinical trials, and it's not possible to do current good manufacturing practice compliance for them, again, because they're not regulated under those frameworks. And legally, there have never been any clinical trial subjects or investigators, and obviously, there has never been any informed consent. So all of those people who were the clinical sites, the CROs, the clinical trial subjects who volunteered for this, they were lied to. They were told they're participating in a real clinical trial, but legally it wasn't a real clinical trial. It was voluntary performance act by everyone involved. And by the way, thanks to Barack Obama, who put in place Cures Act, the informed consent today is conditional. It's actually not absolute. It says that if it's not in the best interest of the subject, they don't have to be informed. And this is what was used exactly here. Somebody, HHS secretary, whoever, decided that it wasn't in the best interest of these subjects to be told that the clinical trial is a farce. And so they were not told. And neither were the investigators or the CROs or the clinical sites or anyone who participated in this. And by the way, a lot of people took it seriously. The FDA reviewers took it seriously. 2 of them committed suicide. A lot of people took it seriously, thought that this was actually real development and approval, where in fact it was a lie.
So you're saying that there was a limited number of people who actually knew the truth here?
Yes, a very limited number. So the lie was perpetrated on everyone, including most of the employees of the HHS, most of the employees of the FDA. There are 15,000 of them. Maybe only a handful at the top knew the true legal status of these products. And so is, I think, majority of Pfizer employees or Moderna employees have no idea what's going on. The people in their general counsel office, of course, knew. The CEOs, the executives at the top knew. The rest of them didn't. That's how this whole lie was perpetrated, and people were acting as if it was real.
Well, Sasha, I just want to interject here. A woman who needs no introduction has just joined us, Lara Logan. Thank you so much for coming. It's an honor to have you here. And Lara will be hosting. And Lara, interject anytime you want, okay?
Yes, hi there. It's nice to see you again, Sasha.
Hi, Lara.
And thank you very much, Glenn. Welcome, everybody. I have the internet gremlins blocking my access to everything, so it's a little more challenging than it should be to get onto these. But I just want to, Sasha, you have. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with your background. I know that you have been working on this for a very long time, and you have an extensive background in medical research. Do you mind just taking us through that?
Yes, hi. So just to step back, my background is in the pharmaceutical research and development space. I spent 25 years working in this industry. I worked in various capacities. I ultimately ran my own contract research organizations, which are contractors to pharma companies performing clinical trials in humans. And we did certain technical aspects of those trials, assessments of data. As part of being regulated industry, you need to know the regulations. I did interact with FDA quite frequently on behalf of my clients, and also as part of Cardiovascular Safety Research Consortium, which was answering questions about cardiovascular safety assessments in clinical trials. And that's how I know, it's a practical knowledge of these regulations. And that's why I started looking into this, because I realized very early on that hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin were being suppressed. And this is extremely wrong if you think about the medicine and how it's practiced, and also how the FDA typically looks at drugs. And there's always preference for something that has been on the market for a long time and has been used and you understand it, versus something completely novel. And here everything was turned upside down, and that's what started me questioning it and looking into it. And I've done this research over the past 2 years. I've collaborated more recently with Catherine Watt. So I'm referring to her. She's a legal researcher and a journalist. And she has compiled on her Substack encyclopedia of law, tracing all these pseudo-legalization of this atrocity. Let's call things the proper ways, proper names. This is an atrocity perpetrated by our government and governments worldwide on their own people. So she traced it back to, if you're so curious, you can go even to the early 1900s or even before. But there's a lot of research, and she cited all the laws that I just, I showed a couple of examples. There are actually 6 enabling statutes in the U.S. law, but I've been covering only 3 aspects of it in my presentations, just for brevity. And so that's deeply researched and documented, chapter and verse, everything is there. We have hundreds of pages of documentation of how our Congress gave up their power, the power that they didn't have the right to give up, yet they did. They gave up the power to the executive branch over time, and the executive branch essentially hijacked it and now is able to do this through these pseudo-legalization of a crime. Of course, you cannot legalize a crime, but they did. And so that's one part. Which is from the legal standpoint. Now, from the practical standpoint, that's what I was looking at, and I found 2 other areas which are very well documented now. And the first one I've uncovered, as I said, through this batch variability analysis, is the fact that these products are not produced to current good manufacturing practices. I've tried to popularize this idea. A lot of people dismiss it, and they say, well, it's just a manufacturing error. Oh, they'll fix the manufacturing error, without realizing that it's not just a manufacturing error, and these products cannot be produced to good manufacturing practices. That's the whole point. And the good manufacturing practices are the law, extensive law. They're violating it in gazillion ways, and it is the only part that is enforceable. So the deaths and injuries are not enforceable because of the PrEP Act and other things that exempt vaccines from any liability. But they're not exempt from good manufacturing practices. And that's the part of the law that's enforceable. And that's why I've been an advocate of this area. And a lot of experts, unfortunately, don't understand it because they never had to produce anything to good manufacturing practices. And they don't understand it, and they dismiss it, and they say, well, it's going to be fixed. And it's not going to be fixed.
Okay, so just so that we understand, the documents that you're relying on, in part, you have Catherine Watts's research from Substack. You have laws actually passed by Congress over time that are a matter of public record and cannot be disputed. You have documents from the Department of Defense. Can you take us through that?
Yeah, so the third part is the Department of Defense involvement. Again, while it was mentioned at the beginning, it was sort of presented to the public as, they're just helping with logistics because of the deep freezing temperatures that are required.
Sure, the Army can bring in the hospital offshore in New York, and the Army can do this, and we can have the military do that, and people feel reassured in when they're told there's a time of crisis to know that the Defense Department is stepping up and doing its job, right? That's how it was presented.
It was presented that way, but turns out that's not exactly how the Department of Defense is really involved in it. Turns out that they are Chief Operating Officer of Operation Warp Speed, the Department of Defense. That was never really popularized, but it is in their own internal documents, which I have, and they've been declassified now. So the Department of Defense is the Chief Operating Officer of the entire Operation Warp Speed. The different parts of the government, including HHS, are participating in a huge coordinated effort to develop, design, do the clinical trials, do all the operations. So it's U.S. government led by Department of Defense operation to design and develop these so-called countermeasures. It includes all countermeasures, but majority of the money was spent for the vaccines. So then Department of Defense gave all this money through BARDA, through a set of managers. One of the managers is Advanced Technology International, well-established defense contractor making weapons for the Department of Defense. So they're managing this. About $47 billion were distributed to making countermeasures, of which $33 billion is for the vaccines, just on the R&D side. We're not talking about the purchasing contracts, which were even bigger than that, commitments to purchase. And so that all went through Department of Defense, 100% of it. And the contracts are very, very tight. The manufacturer has really no freedom as to how they're going to execute the contract, but they don't require any safety or efficacy to be proven. They just micromanage the hell out of them, give them a lot of money, and direct them to use established DoD network of manufacturers to perform these tasks.
You think it's the pharmaceutical companies that are doing their own research on their own, under their own steam, and then you find out actually this is a DoD managed program, and so this is a fundamental shift in understanding for the public. And so I just want you, Sasha, to have an opportunity to show the actual basis of it, so that it can't just be dismissed.
Absolutely. So those are great points, because this is exactly where I am in the presentation. So even before we talk about Department of Defense, I think very few people realize that the National Security Council was in charge, or is in charge, of COVID policy and not the Health and Human Services. So that was a very strange response to public health, what was presented as a public health event to us, to put National Security Council in charge of COVID policy. So National Security Council is an executive forum for foreign policy and national security to the President of the United States, and it does not include health-related agencies as normal attendees. And regular attendees, as you can see listed here, include a lot of defense, so Vice President, Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of Defense, Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and Director of National Intelligence. So the attendees of this National Security Council are primarily defense and intelligence. It has nothing to do with health, and public health agencies do not participate in it.
So this would indicate to me, and I wonder if you asked anyone this question, that from the very beginning, the United States government knew that this was a bioweapon attack.
Absolutely,
this was not a health emergency, that it was a national security emergency.
Absolutely, they did. And actually, recently, the article came out with another set of documents and contracts awarded by the Department of Defense to vendors who were doing work for them in Ukraine 3 months before the global pandemic was announced. And those contracts were specifically for COVID-19 research.
Yeah, it's really stunning, the picture that it begins to present, right? Because what it tells us is, well, and first of all, that we were denied this information. The public was never told that. Part of the problem here is we want our intelligence agencies and the Department of Defense to recognize if there is an attack on this country. But finding out that months in advance you're doing commissioning this kind of research, that when this hits, you don't tell the country that there's a national security imperative to this, and then you allow the impression to persist that the health agencies are dealing with this because it's a health emergency. You're deceiving the people of this country. You're deceiving our leaders. You're deceiving doctors and nurses, the whole medical community. I mean, everybody is deceived by this.
Absolutely. Remember at the beginning, you were not even allowed to question the narrative that this was a zoonotic or some sort of naturally
some zoonotic where it went from animals to humans. Yes,
right.
in the bat market, right?
Yeah, in the Wuhan in wet market, this was a zoonotic, totally natural evolution of virus jumping from animal to human, and you were not even able to question it at all at the beginning. They were suppressing and hiding this information. So now we have the set of facts. The DoD knew, they awarded work for this several months before this pandemic emerged. Then they knew that this was not natural, and they knew this was a biowarfare agent being deployed, and then they covered it up and pretended it was a zoonotic origin virus. So that's a set of facts that's indisputable here.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
And one other thing here, Lara, that we have to note is also the secrecy surrounding the ingredients of the vaccine, because the intellectual property is protected by these protocols laid out here. It actually protects other organizations and the taxpayer from knowing what's in these vaccines, isn't the injections? Is that correct, Sasha?
Yes, correct. So under that other transaction authority, as I mentioned before, that allows them to not only hide the IP from the U.S. government overall, but basically DoD can now hide the technology and IP from, let's say, for example, FDA or HHS in general. So there's a lot of secrecy that's enabled by this.
Why the secrecy, do you think?
The secrecy is because it's their own. So I strongly believe, my opinion, given all these facts today, is that DoD is together with other U.S. government agencies, are running this biowarfare against American people and against people of the world themselves. That's why they wanted to cover it up for so long, because they built this biowarfare agent, they deployed it, and then they deployed the injections. So it's a two-part biowarfare agent. So they deployed initial part, which is probably not as effective because we know that biological agents, they denature outside and they're not very effective, don't affect a lot of people. But the most effective part is when you inject somebody with it. And so that was the whole plan. They needed to, people line up voluntarily, get injected, and that's why they play-acted this whole thing for several years like this.
So Sasha, to be clear, you're saying that the original virus was created as a bioweapon by the U.S. government?
It looks like, yes, it looks like. A heavy involvement of U.S. government, including contracts that we have identified.
So which contracts are those specifically?
Well, the ones that were just recently published, the award in Ukraine specifically to work on COVID research and countermeasures. And the contracts that I have in my possession for the COVID countermeasures themselves, they go back at least to 2012. So those are the same contracts that have been used to develop these so-called vaccines, but they go back many, many years.
And I know we're going to continue with the slide presentation, but my last question on this slide is, do you have any indication as in your research of who was leading this?
But so one of the, definitely on the Moderna side, there's also a contract or material transfer agreement and confidentiality agreement that has been published recently. I have it. And that one is between NIAID, and it specifically states that NIAID is the co-owner of the Moderna vaccine. They also have two IND, investigational new drug application numbers, which I've noted a long time now, and I've been publishing about it. One of them belongs to Moderna, one of them belongs to NIAID. So they're definitely co-owners. They definitely transferred material before. So in late 2019, they transferred Moderna vaccine candidates. And the signatories on that is Moderna, Ralph Baric. There's a bunch of people, so people from NIAID, obviously Anthony Fauci, heavily involved. So they're co-owners of these injections. They have been developing them way before we were told that they've made them over the weekend. Somebody gave us a code and we designed it over the weekend. That's just nonsense.
Okay, so just to remind people that NIAID is the National Institute. It's for infectious diseases.
Yes.
And is that not where Dr. Fauci's wife works?
Yes, I believe so. And he's also obviously NIH. So he has.
Yes, he's National Institutes of Health over all of this.
Overall, yeah.
And so what it effectively means is that the very health experts that were pushing these vaccines on everybody, who said things like, let's not forget, right, that this is the plague of the unvaccinated, when they were trying to force everyone to take this, and then had to admit later that when they said it would prevent transmission of the disease, that was a lie. When they said that it would keep you healthier, that you wouldn't get as sick, we now know that that was a lie, and so on and so on, right?
Yeah, but they needed to scare people initially with this oh, it's a viral pandemic. It's this naturally evolved, scary super virus that's going to kill, half the world's population if you don't get this vaccine. And then they had to suppress the hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin and early treatments in order to maintain this lie, so that they could get more people dead or more people sick. Remember, they pushed all this into the nursing homes again to make sure that there will be more deaths that could be coded as COVID and drive this propaganda and nightmare. And people were really terrified. And people were terrified, and they were told, "Oh, but don't worry, we're making this vaccine that's going to be magical." And then everyone lined up to get injected. So that's a perfect plan, and you can see the whole pre-planning, unfolding in these contracts and how they set it up.
You mentioned Fauci and you mentioned Ralph Baric. Can you explain who Ralph Baric is?
Well, Ralph Baric is a professor at University North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And he was heavily involved. In fact, he's also mentioned in Moderna documents that I have reviewed, their non-clinical studies that were supposed to be done before human trials were initiated, but of course that didn't happen that way. And I found a lot of problems with those animal studies, and specifically they also mentioned Ralph Baric, who provided a mouse-adapted version of SARS-CoV-2 for their experiments. And that's in the same place where they're saying, oh, this is so novel. There are no animal models. But hey, Ralph Baric has this mouse-adapted one already. And so when did he have time to develop a mouse-adapted SARS-CoV?
And who was paying for it? Because he had contracts. The Department of Defense was paying for it, right? Yes. They were sending their contracts to Ralph Baric at Chapel Hill University. And also Eco Alliance, right? Peter Danzig.
Eco Health Alliance, yeah.
Eco Health Alliance.
Yeah.
You see their name in the documents too?
There's a lot of names attached to those documents. Oh, the other person everybody should know is Barney McClellan. I forget his academic affiliation, but he's also on those material transfer agreements because he's a key IP holder of what's in these bioweapon shots. So he may be one of the few people who actually know exactly what's in them. So that whole operation, Eco Health Alliance, of course, is heavily involved. They received a lot of grants from the US government, from NIH and from DARPA to develop a bat coronavirus vaccine. So in their documents, they're saying, we're going to be vaccinating the bats. The bats that live 1,300 miles from Wuhan, by the way, in caves.
Yes.
There are no people around. But for some reason, desperately, Ralph Baric needs to vaccinate those bats. And the way he was going to vaccinate them is through gels that they can eat, that they will be put next to the, bat cave, so that when they're flying in, they can eat that gel and spread it around. Through aerosol sprayers that would be also installed in the cave when they're flying back and forth and get sprayed with this particular concoction. And, some other formulations of the same thing. So that begs the question, were the bats a model for something like a city where people commute, go in and out, go to work, come back, get sprayed, some gel gets distributed so it's on their hands? I have all these questions that I think somebody needs to answer.
So won't you please continue with your presentation, Sasha? Thank you.
Okay, so this is just a confirmation of a previous slide. As I said, the policy was set up by the National Security Council. This is from government's document, which was updated and very heavily revised between the 2018 and then 2020, where they put all this structure in place, saying that the policy for COVID coordination response should be set by the National Security Council. The original declaration of the public health emergency was done under the Stafford Act, which was never used before. And this was used to put FEMA in charge, as a figurehead, serving in the role of a public health incident. And that was a perfect figurehead because FEMA has never had any plans for managing public health events or pandemics in the United States. And so that makes them a perfect figurehead because they have no idea what they're doing. And so somebody else can manipulate everything else.
Wow.
Okay. So, and HHS, as opposed to in the 2018 version of the plan, they were in charge of the public health emergencies, which is reasonable, their health agency. But now all of a sudden they're not. They're involved heavily in various activities, and most of them have to do with information control and propaganda. Obviously, they're pretending that this is a public health emergency. They need to act as if it's one, and they have been doing that.
They need to control the message.
They need to control the message. So in collaboration with their media,
propagandists.
Yeah.
With their propagandists masquerading as journalists.
Yes, exactly. That's what they've been doing all along. They have been pretending that this is a public health event where, in fact, it's a biowarfare deployment in the United States by the United States government. And here's the organizational chart from this document that's been declassified. I have full document, and it was for the Vaccines and Related Biologicals Advisory Committee meeting on October 22nd, 2020, where Operation Warp Speed was discussed. This is presentation by Operation Warp Speed, and this organizational chart clearly delineates that Chief Operating Officer of this whole organization is the Department of Defense, and that HHS is here Chief Science Advisor. So who's in charge? Department of Defense. Then we have this whole part of the org chart, which is the top part, executive part, and that's all National Security Council, DoD, BARDA. And you can see that all of these functions are supply, production, distribution, clinical trials, manufacturing, personnel information, including legal affairs and Office of General Counsel. It's all the US government. And so this explains the curious thing when, remember, Aaron Siri was arguing in court to get the Pfizer clinical trial data released, which they wanted to hide for 75 years.
Yes.
Who was he arguing against? Pfizer lawyers were not even present in court. It was Department of Justice lawyers. And everybody was like, why are they defending Pfizer's commercial interest? Well, that's why, because the commercial interest is not really Pfizer, it's actually US government.
It's that, Sasha, it's just stunning. I want you to continue, but can you just tell us where you got this document?
So this was sent to me. It's a declassified document. It's a PowerPoint, which was presented at this October 22nd, 2020 meeting for Vaccines-Related Biologicals Advisory Committee, which is FDA, HHS, basically all the government.
Yes.
And so I have it. I can send it to you. And so this is the org chart from there.
And what was can you just paint a very brief picture? Maybe Sam, you can paint a very brief picture. What was the picture around at the time? What was the reality that the world was living in? Because this is something that I think is lost. Right at this moment, right at this moment when this meeting is taking place and DOD is running everything and lying to us, what was the impact of this, what they had unleashed on the world?
What was the impact? Well, many of us have actually suspected for some time, because the red flags just kept popping up and popping up and popping up. You have to go back to who declared the so-called pandemic. You have to go back to how they were diagnosing the cases with a polymerase chain reaction test that was not meant to diagnose any type of illness or clinical cases, as stated by the Nobel Prize winning Kary Mullis, who invented the test. You have to look at how they were counting deaths. You have to look at how the VAERS site actually tells us that people are not considered vaccinated until 14 days after their last vaccine. And so like 80% of the adverse events actually occur within that 2-week period. So they're literally blocking those safety signals. You have to look at the excess deaths now that even insurance companies are reporting on. Huge standard deviations away from the norm. And I mean, we're talking cataclysmic statistical anomalies here, and it's only because money is involved, Lara. So many of us are sitting in the background in extreme frustration, looking at the real data, the unfiltered data.
Yes.
And we're getting deaths and we're getting adverse events that are just systematically being deleted. Sasha can tell you horror stories about all of that. And, this is the state of the world today. And you've got people and governments, organizations, individual politicians literally doubling down, tripling down on their positions. And I personally am not incredibly optimistic unless people start to take some action. People start to wake up and take some action, because this is going to be similar to what happened with tobacco back in the day when everyone was recommending it. 9 out of 10 physicians were recommending smoking, Camel brand cigarettes. And
right.
It's going to fade away. And this is why they asked for 55 years originally to suppress the data. They wanted everybody
75.
to get. And then
they
came back
wanted
with
75
after that. They had the nerve to actually up the ante, right? And so there's a concerted effort here to cover their tracks and to stick to these guidelines that Sasha has ingeniously exposed. I have to leave very shortly here, Lara, unfortunately, and Sasha and Glenn and Vlad to go speak. But I just wanted to say that for Sasha to actually trace in writing this preparation for the opportunities that a scandemic could present is nothing short of monumental. What Sasha has done here, I'm not brown-nosing you, Sasha, but honest to God, what you have done here is ingenious, meticulous, to follow the data and to follow the so-called legal trail. So I just want to leave with that. If people can just appreciate what you've done, it is absolutely monumental. And we are owed a great debt to you, and I know it's going to be attacked, and we have to be prepared for that as well.
Yeah, well, thank you, Sam. And the best thing is that this is all in their own documents, in their own words.
Right.
I'll show you some more of this, but actually they tell a lot of the truth if you read the words carefully.
Okay, so let's. Sam, do we have to let you go now? I don't want to
Yes,
make you
unfortunately, I have to go. Please check out the Fifth Doctor on Rumble. Lots of great truth being exposed there. And it was an honor to be here with you. Lara, you're a legend. And Glenn, you don't get the credit that you're due with your activism and working behind the scenes. We love you, Glenn, for everything that you do and all the stress you put yourself under. I know it's tremendous. And Sasha, God bless you. We need you. We really need you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, so Sasha, I want you to continue with your presentation if you don't mind. But just before that, to paint the rest of that picture is by October 2020, right? We had an extraordinary number of people had died in the nursing homes. We had schools that were closed. We had churches were closed, mosques were closed, synagogues were closed. Elderly people in the nursing homes had been put into involuntary solitary confinement, right? Dementia rates were going through the roof. Mental illness, anxiety, depression, all of these things. There were, somebody I know, someone close to my family in South Africa was beaten to death by an abusive husband because of these extreme lockdowns. The entire world that we had known had come to a standstill by the time this meeting took place, right?
Exactly. And remember, people could not attend to their loved ones dying in hospitals or in nursing homes. They had to attend funerals by Zoom.
I buried my father by Zoom. I did exactly that.
It's incredibly heartbreaking. And what was being done to people, what kind of, people were brutalized, and it is an atrocity. It's a government committed atrocity all over the world, in every country of the world, playing from the same script. And here we know who was in charge. At least we know for this country, and I'm sure they're in charge for a lot of other countries too. This is their own organizational structure. This is how they set it up.
Glenn, do you want to jump in there before Sasha continues?
Well, I was just going to say I also lost my mother in May of 2020, and the things they put us through. They all knew right up front about hydroxychloroquine. It was
ivermectin.
It was reviewed as part of SARS-1 early in the 2000s.
Fauci's name is on those papers. He knew.
Yes.
Absolutely, he is. He certainly knew right from the very beginning.
Yes.
So Sasha, please carry on.
Yeah. So just to finish on this part of the organizational chart, again, we see that the government, U.S. government is in charge here, and the chief operating officer is Department of Defense. And then this part is the third level down, pharmas. They're not in charge, but they're getting tremendous amount of money. So, they're fulfilling these orders. But as you can see, everything is being designed and developed and tightly controlled by the Department of Defense. And that was, for me, as I'll talk a little bit more about the contracts, but for me, as being part of the pharma industry, this is very odd structure, especially when they're pretending that this is all arms deals, just government is just ordering some things from pharma companies. That's not how pharma companies are extremely sensitive about all of these parts that are here delineated as government responsibility. They need to do all of this themselves, but for some reason the government is doing it here. Okay. So who is really manufacturing these injections? That was the question when I saw this org chart. So who is really making them? Well, it turns out in the same presentation, Operation Warp Speed and BARDA were bragging about their vaccine manufacturing portfolio. And this is not all of them. They have hundreds and hundreds of companies in this portfolio. But for the purposes of this presentation, you can see that they're calling on the right-hand side, they're saying vaccine supporting efforts. These are the long-standing, established, mostly defense contractors to the government, and I've circled several of them. They even identified them as, I forget the acronym, but basically it stands for Center of Manufacturing Excellence for the government. And so Emergent Biosolutions is one of them. This other company, Ology, it's been renamed into Resilience now. And then some academic institutions such as Texas A&M. And so this is the long-standing, so Emergent contract, by the way, I have it going back for these, they called it pan-influenza vaccines. I have it going back to 2012. And this is a contract that they gave to Emergent in different options. It starts in 2012 and goes to 2037. So as you can see, it's a gigantic relationship.
It's
huge.
It's
And Emergent, by the way, is it's the government exclusive manufacturer of anthrax vaccine, which is associated with just as horrific problems, never have been manufactured to good manufacturing practices. Emergent has never been compliant with good manufacturing practices. They keep receiving audit findings from the FDA and nothing ever changes. They keep producing for the government. So obviously the government wants them to produce the sloppy, non-compliant, really bad products, and that's their purpose. Same goes for this new company, Ology. Probably same goes for the Texas A&M. So that's the established contractors that have, and by the way, another lie that we were sold and everybody somehow believed was that these vaccines were just designed in a weekend, and then in 6 months we have 500 million doses being cranked out. That's nonsense. It cannot happen. If you think about a traditional type of manufacturing, let's say cars, right? Something completely understood has been done for 100 years now. If you go to Ford Motor Company today and tell them, here's $10 billion, I need 1 million brand new cars from this completely new line, manufactured in 6 months, the answer is going to be it's not possible. It's not possible because Ford doesn't have extra production lines built for this. They don't have the new platform. They don't have the designs. They don't have the staff. They don't have suppliers, not enough chips, no parking place to put it in. So it's not possible unless you have this already in place, which is what's here on the right-hand side. So then the government goes to these people on the left-hand side, which they call vaccines, and they're saying, here's a bunch of money, go to these other guys, and they'll do everything for you. We already established it. That's exactly what happened. And as I said, they tell you a lot of the truth in these presentations, because if you read it carefully, you can see that on the left-hand side, all they ordered was a demo. All of them say demo. And on the right-hand side, that's the manufacturing.
So what does that mean? I mean, obviously, demo is the demonstration, right?
Demonstration, which means fake. So as I was talking about, and here's another example of it. This is from BARDA from the same, well, actually not the same meeting. This is BARDA from about a year ago, virtual event. They're bragging about their accomplishments and saying that in 2020, we distributed all this money. And if you can see, it's like half a billion here, $1 billion here, $2 billion for Pfizer. And so we threw all this money from the helicopter, and we bought a bunch of demos.
But okay, Sasha, that is just, I mean, that's pretty stunning. So just take me through that. So make sure that it's clear. Okay. So I understand what you're saying, that you go to Ford Motor Company, you can't make 10 million cars in that time. So they said, okay, use all of these companies, right? These are all companies that the defense industry had already in place and set up, and they had capacity. So you could argue from the other side, well, you know, we knew we needed a vaccine urgently, and the pharmaceutical companies didn't have the infrastructure to do it. So we used this existing infrastructure that we have. That'll be their way to try to, you know, to try to weasel out of a responsibility for this. They'll say we had to do it because it was an emergency, right? But what you're actually finding, just so I'm clear on this, what they're paying the pharmaceutical companies for is to basically do nothing?
Yes, exactly. They're paying pharmaceutical company to slap their name on it, to pretend to the public that this is a trusted pharmaceutical brand. Because imagine if they said, oh, you know, we have these vaccines, DOD has been working on this, we're going to have Emergent Biosolutions cranking them out as a DOD contractor under DOD contracts, everybody line up. I don't think so. People would have more questions, right?
So they needed the blessing of the pharmaceutical companies and the health industry. And to get that, they bought it, basically. They bought them off.
They bought them off with a lot of money, and they said, we are ordering a large-scale demonstration from you, which is a very key word. And they're honest about it here, as you can see.
And one other question. Who is BARDA?
BARDA is a Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority.
Kind of like DARPA, but for medical?
It's kind of like DARPA, but they technically sit within HHS. They are, if you go on their website, you know, if you read their functions, it seems like, oh, you know, it's a government accelerator / you know, maybe we can provide some early investment funding and some grants and some technical support to have companies produce, and they justify their existence as, well, you know, this is things that are helpful to the society, but there's not enough market for them normally, so the pharma companies don't want to invest in it. So this is the government's way of creating a market and giving them grants to produce these vaccines, which normally are, you know, don't have the market. Now, I'll show you in a couple of slides. It actually now dominates the pharmaceutical industry in the United States. But they pretend like this is such a niche, and, you know, it's just technical support from the government for these companies to work on these products. But as you can see, there's a huge amount of money that's being plowed through this mechanism into the pharma industry for very poorly defined deliverables. So let me show you a couple of other slides that will become a little bit more clear. So here's another slide from the same place. BARDA, in the same meeting, goes and brags about their innovation. Remember, everybody was saying, oh, you know, this development is going to be accelerated. It's so brilliant. They figured out how to cut red tape and accelerate the, you know, normally very long and very rigorous and boring pharmaceutical research and development method. Okay, well, so their key innovation is that BARDA, being part of the government, can break the law. Yeah, that's how they innovate. They are doing large-scale commercial manufacturing. I have really detailed records of it for Pfizer specifically. They're doing large-scale commercial manufacturing before the product is tested for safety.
It's really quite stunning when you think about it. We have all these laws in place because over time, the American, you know, the society has recognized that if you don't put these checks and balances on manufacturing companies and corporations, then you get hurt. The people get hurt. And now here you have a government agency that is set up in a way to specifically bypass those regulations.
Yep, exactly. So you peons in the private sector, pharmaceutical companies, you have to comply with all of this.
Right.
Us, the government.
We don't.
We don't. And that's how we innovate. Okay. So that's their key innovation. They're manufacturing commercial scale and they're shipping them internationally, violating import-export laws, violating the good distribution law, everything. They're shipping it internationally and interstate before safety was tested. And even after it was proven that they're not in good manufacturing practice compliant, manufacturing these products. They still go on and ship them.
So that's just outrageous on so many levels, Sasha. This is, I hope you have good security at home. Right?
Well, I mean, I've put everything out in the public domain, and a lot of people have this information already. So I don't see, and they
have
themselves
two strategies, Sasha. One strategy is they ignore you and they pretend that you're so irrelevant they don't have to worry about you. And as long as your research doesn't, isn't effective and doesn't reach lawmakers and other people who can actually, act on this, then they let you live, right? But once you're gaining traction and something effective is actually threatening to happen, then you become much more of a target potentially.
Well, you can live your life in fear, but I choose not to. And because if you do live your life in fear, then you give these people authority over you. They don't have authority over me.
That's right. That's right.
So that's my recommendation to everyone. But I've shared this widely. It's available. These are public documents. These are their own documents. Several lawmakers already have it. So
and to date, has anyone been able to disprove anything that your research shows?
Nope. I haven't seen, nobody even attempted to. So I welcome anyone who wants to say, you got something wrong, or debate, or, I'm very open to that. Please tell me where I made a mistake, because I'd like to know that too. But so far, so let's continue on this.
So, and in terms of the academic institutions and the academic research that Glenn raised, which is a very significant point, can you address that, Sasha?
Well, so academic institutions, a lot of them are ongoing consortium members for these. So particular consortium that was involved here was medical, chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear countermeasures. So if you call them countermeasures, they're not weapons. But that consortium involves currently 318 entities, of which academic institutions, huge number of them, are part. And they get tremendous amount of money from the US government, including NIH and including BARDA and DARPA and other places that give them money to do research in these areas. And of course, they're bought off. They have been bought off long before even pharmas were bought off by the US government. And they're actively participating in this and feeding off the government, helicopter money that gets thrown their way with no real accountability.
How much money are we talking about?
It's huge amounts of money. So NIH, has, gigantic budget. The slide I was showing before where BARDA distributed $47 billion. Well, just for, this was in, just about 18 months of the, COVID countermeasures. And just for reference, entire U.S. pharmaceutical industry spends about $100 billion on R&D. So that's BARDA alone controlling 50% of pharmaceutical industry R&D spend, which means they control the 100% of the industry. Because if you have one buyer that buys 50% of the stuff with contracts that don't involve much liability at all, don't involve much regulation, you can do whatever you want, just follow the orders. Well, they control the entire pharmaceutical industry. We don't have private sector anymore.
It's really quite astonishing, isn't it?
Yeah. And the same goes for academia, and that's been going on much longer. They're completely bought off, not just the grant money, but also all the money that they get from the government. Like, for example, I think Yale, this was recently published, Yale gets about $600 million from the state in funding, and they get about $400 million from tuition. That's why they don't care if they kill a bunch of students with these mandates. They will go and do mandates because the majority of the money comes from the state. And that's another reason why money controls all this criminal activity and these atrocities. That's how they fund it. They fund it by printing the money, distributing it from helicopters, and saying, keep following orders, you'll get more of it.
And then at the same time, insisting that every student gets vaccinated without telling the students or their families or their parents any of this.
Yes. And denying any injury. I know I know.
And denying the deaths and the injuries.
Yes,
Absolutely.
I know a bunch of Ivy League colleges. And I looked into Cornell, for example, had one of the most militant. I have friends, children attending it. One of the most militant vaccine mandates. They were imprisoning students in their dorms without any due process, and they were just absolutely denying any exemption, anything. And even a year ago, they already had 5 sudden deaths on campus, and they keep doing it.
So again, transparency is the issue here. That the public really has the right to know about a lot of this. And there certainly are things in the defense that need some degree of secrecy, but this has gone way too far, and the public, should have the opportunity to understand it. And even if it's scarier, even worse than some of their prior thoughts, once you at least have a sense of, oh, at least I can see how the parts get connected now. It's terrible, but at least I know it's terrible. I can figure out ways to proceed. I can figure out ways.
I can deal with the truth. I might not like it.
Correct.
I might not like it. It may be very challenging or heartbreaking and so on. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's the truth, and there's only one truth, right? There is only one truth, no matter what people say about it. And typically what we find with human nature is people would rather deal with that than not deal with it. I know there are lots of people who maybe have taken the shot and given their children the shot, and they don't want to face the full reality, the full horror of what could happen as a result. But at the same time, when you really push people, in my 51 years, I have never found people who don't actually, at the end of the day, want to deal with the whole truth. And again, central to this is Sasha's research, right? So where can they find that?
So I publish it on Substack, and you can look my name, Sasha Latypova, and my Substack is called Due Diligence and Art.
So on Substack, people can read you. They can find the original documents that you.
Yeah, let me share. Yeah, so the documents, my presentations and documents are on my Substack. Not all of it, but it links also to my video channel. So here are a couple of methods to find all this. And for Substack, you can look up just my name. It's SASHALATYPOVA.
That's Sasha's the easy part.
Yeah. Then my last name, LATY. P as in Peter, O V as in Victor, A, .substack.com. And
Sasha Latypova at substack.com.
And that's published there. And I refer to my sources. I also refer to Catherine Watt's Substack. So
and that's Catherine with a K.
Catherine with a K, yes. So and her Substack is all the legal history and explanation from the legal perspective how all of this was, how this crime was legalized, which
yes.
You can never do, but they did. And it's not constitutional, obviously, it's not lawful, and that's another piece of work and reform that we need to work on going forward so that this can never be committed. But people need to understand our first step is to stop people from getting these injections and any subsequent injections. And if we all stop, which is already actually very successful because the uptake of these new boosters is really, really minimal. So we know that majority of the US is with us. Majority of the American public understands this. They understand it's dangerous. And so we just need to make sure that that happens. And then we can find one honest judge and one honest prosecutor to start going after this whole criminal cartel.
So let's wrap this up here. Sasha, your last thoughts, and Glenn, after that, your final word. Sure.
Well, I couldn't agree more with what you said, Laura. This is a time for everyone to start speaking the truth. All of us, stand up and join those people who were prosecuted and canceled and got their licenses revoked and even, physically brutalized. You gotta join the right side of history. This is your time, and let's start bringing this all to a close, unravel and investigate and do a proper prosecution of all who are responsible for this atrocity.
Yes, and one question for you, just a final question for you, is how long has this research been out? I mean, how long have our leaders and our medical community and our government had to address this, and how long have they just let it been just letting it sit there and hoping it goes away?
So, I started uncovering, parts of it were available very early on, early 2021. By middle of 2021, we knew for sure the manufacturing part of it. And then later, toward early 2022, we knew for sure about the DoD involvement and all the legal shenanigans. So this has been available for about a year now. I've shared it with a lot of high level people in many places. So
including the government,
yes. And so this has been available. They've seen it. They know, not all of the people. So it needs to be more widely shared, obviously. But there's enough out there available that anyone can look it up and make up your own mind. See where I'm wrong. Find me wrong.
And yet they don't.
Yeah.
Well, there's no question that people all across this country want accountability and they want the whole truth. And so, Sasha, we owe you a great debt for all your work. Glenn, you have been absolutely relentless, a true force in this fight. And so thank you both so much, to both of you, for your personal sacrifices. And I'm glad to hear that you're still in the fight, because this is an endurance marathon, right? There's a long way to go.
Well, Laura, we appreciate your presence and the audience you bring and the caliber of people that follow you.
Thank you, Laura.
So much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.